We are headed into week 4 of the 2022 fantasy football season. It's the Lateral Show!
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Lateral Show. Fasten your seatbelts, because here we go.
What's up, nerds? It's another episode of the Lateral Show, a sideways look at fantasy football. Also, a fantasy six-pack production. If you have never been to this YouTube channel before, go ahead, hit that like button, hit subscribe. It would be super awesome. And also, if you want to read the behind the paywall information that I put in my waiver wire column, and you also like premium rankings, DFS tools, access to a Discord community with so many helpful people, you can do all of that just by checking out the plans at fantasysixpack.net/plans. My name is Herms. You can follow me on Twitter at Herms NFL. And I am joined, as always, by McLateral. Hello!
How's it going, people? Season's eats and greets. We are here at week 4, and actually, things are going okay. My Scott Fishbowl team is not doing so hot, but otherwise, I'm in good shape.
I feel that pain. I definitely picked the wrong quarterback because I went with the very aggressive bully tight end approach, and I knew I had to nail the one quarterback pick because, just like that's going to be the guy carrying my team. And unfortunately, it was somebody that we are going to discuss as part of this episode's Sunday storylines, looking ahead to week 4, because I've got 2 veteran quarterbacks I am not so thrilled with, and there's a lot to discuss between the 2 of them. Which ones are they? You're going to have to wait and see. And then you've got something pretty interesting just in terms of, I don't know, how would you describe it?
Knowing when to bail on players is an art, not a science. But it is an art that is important to master.
There you go. So we're going to sit y'all down in the classroom, Professor McLateral. It's going to be a good time. We're going to, lay out those lessons because especially, after the waiver wire runs, the player pool is still out there. There are strategic times where you can make those moves and do what. So hey.
If only there was an article that you could read on Fantasy Six Pack that talked about some guys that were available in over 50% of the leagues who performed really well over 3 weeks. But we're still really available and people were kind of sleeping on them. Oh, there is. It's called the Heat Check, and I write it. So if you did, you'd probably have Tyler Conklin and Marcus Mariota, and admittedly, you'd probably also have KJ Osborne. So they're not all hits, but it's definitely something I recommend looking at. It is part of this art, not a science, by trying to make it as sciencey as possible by looking at a sample size.
100%, man. And I am so excited for us to sit down, get some education going, and talk about a couple of veteran quarterbacks we're not thrilled about. But before we get into our review of our topics from last week, we have to hop on our soapbox and jointly, I would assume, say, rest in peace to Coolio, man. So I'm going to go very quickly first.
I'd pour one out, but I've got expensive stuff here. So
that's true. Also, shout out Ace Cider. It's a pineapple cider I've been really enjoying. It's very, very good. But yeah, so because this is definitely a visual thing, and I'm going to have to move my microphone to do it. I grew up a big fan of 90s Nickelodeon, the very, very big part of, my television watching experience as a kid. And the Keenan and Kel show was definitely one of my favorites. I was a huge fan of all that. And when they got there, it was super cool and everything. So when I decided to outfit this space behind me, and there's still some things I have to hang, I'll have a better, interesting background as time goes along. I wanted something to kind of represent that. And even though viewers never end up seeing it, I have an autographed photo of Keenan and Kel behind me. Right there. Yeah. So, when I think of Coolio, I just immediately think of because I was a little too young for Gangsta's Paradise. I mean, obviously I know the song, but whenever I think of him, I just think, oh, here it goes. And I'm just, I lose my mind. So like that's my personal connection to Coolio. If you have any interesting,
yeah, for me, it's Michelle Pfeiffer in the music video. Like, that you don't need anything more than that. It's about as iconic as it gets. The older you get, the more the people you grew up really liking and idolizing or respecting, or just just things you were a fan of, like those things start to disappear, and you realize none of that stuff is permanent. But you should always appreciate when you have the opportunity.
That is very true. Could have said it better myself. So if Coolio's friends and family or whoever's out there watching this, first of all, I don't know how you found this.
Yeah, that's
good for you.
Very impressive.
And second of all, just RIP. Bless up. Bless up. So we got that. I wish there was something a little more fun to talk about, but it's part of life. Just as going over things that you said in a previous episode of a podcast is part of life. That's my wonderful professional segue into talking about what we talked about last week. The review of my topic is super simple because it was kind of just an obvious thing I felt like people needed to do. Just like treat Kyle Pitts as a tight end, quit calling him a wide receiver, but also just like forget the panic, because for a tight end, a lot of the underlying metrics said he was doing well. And what do you know? He goes out against the Seahawks. Awful defense, does really well. His season's back on track. So Kyle Pitts, hooray. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, and like in 2 of the games so far, he's gotten 7 and 8 targets. Like, yeah, he had a fluky 3-target game. But this is a guy you got to go with him. Again, like 13.7 points in PPR last week. No touchdowns. I get it, but you know what? Touchdowns are fluky. It's tough to project them. They're like home runs. But if you get on base, if you get those targets, that's what counts. That's what matters. And Pitts is like an easy example of that.
Yeah, so there you go. That review of Kyle Pitts, still good. How about we go over to your topic from last week? Because there have been some interesting updates. Some a little unfortunate due to injury, some due to just other circumstances. But
yeah. So we got 2 things. Thing number 1. So we talked about the rookie QBs, and it's pretty much staying the same. Mac Jones did have an ankle injury. That looks bad. He will almost certainly miss time, and he might miss a lot of time.
Yeah.
Belichick has said Brian Hoyer will be the quarterback if he's out, though. So Bailey Zappi still something interesting to keep an eye on in case Hoyer isn't good, which, I mean, we've seen Brian Hoyer be not good.
A lot.
It's not an impossibility. But Belichick does like him, and I think he'll give him a surprisingly long leash. So something to keep an eye out for sure. He definitely now leapfrogs into consideration on that front. Then the other one is Mitch Trubisky looked quite bad in week 3. Almost more uninspiring than bad. Like, if you look at the stat line, it's weirdly okay. It's not good. It's not great. But it's like, if you didn't watch him play, you would go, oh, this team just kind of couldn't do it. But like, you can't really blame him for the loss. But if you watch it, he doesn't look good. He's not making amazing decisions. He's not taking shots downfield. There are probably some deeper issues besides just Mitch Trubisky not being good. But it does increase the chances that we see Kenny Pickett sooner than we discussed. I'm still sticking to my week 10 timeline. Tomlin keeps saying he's sticking with Trubisky. I do think it's really likely now that out of that week 10, well, the week 9 bye week into week 10, I do think we see Pickett at this point. I think that is looking incredibly likely in case things turn around. Unless things turn around, rather. So something to keep monitoring. I think the Malik Willis hype train has died back down a bit, unfortunately. Though I still think we see him at some point. Yeah. Tannehill had a surprisingly decent performance last week, which we'll talk about actually here momentarily. But yeah, that's about it, I think. Not huge developments. I think the most interesting one is definitely Kenny Pickett looks more likely to start than he did when we talked last week.
Oh my gosh, yes. And and I put this behind the paywall portion of my waiver wire article, and I won't give away everything because there's still some interesting information that you should check out there. And if you want to, you can access that at fantasy6pack.net/plans. I talked about the PFF grade that they gave out to Trubisky and how it was pretty favorable and how that's kind of raised his overall season grade. But a lot of that really came from that first half performance in that Thursday night game. And I just based off of, because, 3 times 4, however many quarters, whatever. Yeah. So it's just like it's 2 quarters worth of pretty decent play. And the rest has been suspects. I've tweeted about it. And I'm just like, dude, I would bet any amount of money that Trubisky does not survive the month of October as the starter, because like the tricky thing is like just look at the schedule coming up. It's brutal. They have to go against Miami. They have to go against Philly. I mean, there are a couple other tough ones in there, but like,
I think the one thing to keep in mind is Tomlin, while he's not like someone that's going to tank, he's not someone that's going to throw his quarterback to the wolves. So there's a chance he might want to get through that tougher stretch.
That's true.
Give Pickett the best chance to succeed long term. Tomlin certainly Tomlin is he's that guy in your dynasty league who always has like some pesky veterans like stashed in the roster because he's like, I'm never going to tank, but I do have like some long-term ambitions. So like it's all guys like Chris Olave or like, taking a shot on Amon-Ra St. Brown, Ramondre Stevenson last year. But like, meanwhile, there's like, Zay Jones sprinkled in stuff, Marquez Valdez-Scantling. It's just like, they're like towing that line. And sometimes you wonder, like, should we just have committed to tanking? Like, should we just let this happen?
Yeah.
But I think we've seen in the past, especially in the NFL, like not a fantasy take so much, but like we've seen guys get killed. Like we saw what happened to Jason Campbell. We saw what happened to Pat. Basically anyone that suited up for the Washington football team.
Like, we saw a lot of
the
that.
Snyder years. Like we've seen what happens when you like feed these guys to the wolves. It can like wreck a promising career. So it wouldn't shock me if Tomlin does decide to just keep a longer leash on Trubisky for that reason. But I get where you're coming from.
And, I think the point you make about it being an interesting, tightrope between like, are we really just going to commit to the tank? Or are we going to try and figure it out? Is a perfect example of something that I have to talk about as part of this week's topic. So teased it a little bit at the beginning. The 2 veteran quarterbacks I'm really concerned about. I'm going to start with the guy who's on a team that I think has done an awful job of figuring out what it wants to do. Because after having Peyton Manning and eventually having to let him go with his neck, issue, and then stumbling into Andrew Luck, it's like, wow, 2 back-to-back, all world type players, like this is fabulous. Boom. And then the minute Andrew Luck just retires, the Colts are left, and it's like, oh, okay, all right, okay, Jacoby Brissett, all right, here you go, man. And he plays that whole season, and he's like, okay, but not even remotely great. And somewhere in like the owner's suites, they're just watching this and they're like, yeah, oh, that hits different, baby. Let's do this forever. And since then, they've just decided to go with the corpse of a Phillip Rivers, the reclamation project of a Carson Wentz. And now, dude, Matt Ryan looks awful. And it's really disappointing to me because, like just watching Red Zone every Sunday, I told you even a little bit before we started recording, I could recall about 4 instances in where Ryan's awareness in the pocket was just so bad that, just he fumbled like 4 times. When I looked it up, this dude has already fumbled 7 times, man. It is not good. I do not understand how through 3 games you can just turn the ball over that easily. But then also, like when he has to put that little bit of extra mustard on those throws, it ain't quite there. He had a nice little rocket to Jelani Woods. He's had some decent throws to Pittman thus far, but like Matt Ryan looks old. He looks slow. And I just don't think, like, I'm nervous because it's also affected the fantasy production and real life production of Jonathan Taylor, who is a part of the group of the early running backs that people drafted and so far haven't come through. And I just have to think, well, first of all, before I even get into the curious hypothetical NFL part of this, do you care to roster Matt Ryan at all? I'm even in a
I do
super
not.
flex
I'm
league.
like, I'm not.
Or no, okay.
So-
do you care to start Matt Ryan in a super flex league? That's the better question.
So like this week in Scott Fishbowl, I'm debating about starting Jameis Winston. I think I've got Matt Ryan in that similar category where it's like, it's a super flex league, so I might do it because if he has at all a decent game, it just gives you such an advantage. But I'm not feeling good about him having a decent game, and I'm strongly considering other options. So it sort of depends on your roster, if that makes sense. Like if you are someone, so like there's some leagues this year, non-super flex, but actually even Scott Fishbowl, which is super flex, like I just want ham on wide receiver. Like Curtis Samuel's like my wide receiver 6.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that instance, it's just like, yeah, I might play Curtis Samuel instead of playing a quarterback.
Yeah.
I might play Curtis Samuel instead of Jameis Winston. I might play Curtis Samuel instead of Matt Ryan. I don't think we're quite at the point where it's time to pull the trigger on such a but man, we're getting close.
Yeah.
And you're officially thinking about it each week. In one QB leagues, there's no reason to have Matt Ryan on your roster.
Absolutely not.
Period. That unless you have insanely deep benches, in which case everyone has like 2 QBs. Because I'd say he's probably one of 24 quarterbacks I think you should roster. But I don't think he's one of 20.
No, he's definitely, he's worked his way to the back end of that. And, it got me thinking about something that was said on the Football Absurdity podcast. Shout out, friend of the show, Dad Boy Jeff Crisco. He made the joke. So credit where credit's due. This wasn't an original thought that I had, but they were joking about like the Colts' commitment to, for some reason, having the 18th or 19th best quarterback, and just how like strange and bizarre that is. So kind of even going beyond that, first little pit stop of a question, I do want to entertain the possibility, because this goes beyond redraft. This is also a dynasty concern of mine as somebody with some Pittman, with, some, smattering of shares and taxi squads of Jelani Woods, who did look good. What if they just keep doing this? Because I don't like, and they also talked about it on their podcast, like, unless they're bad enough to just fall backward into one of the top 3 picks in the NFL draft, what's stopping them from just signing Jimmy Garoppolo or something and just rolling with this like forever? Because like that scares me.
So I think the one thing that's potentially stopping them is Matt Ryan's contract, which I think is still mildly difficult to work with.
I will check that.
But other than that, yeah, I mean, it would not be a shock at all to see them go for Jimmy Garoppolo. I think it's incredibly likely. And we all thought like Baker Mayfield could be a possible quarterback for the Colts this year. You talk about them like going for the 18th or 19th best quarterback, like in fantasy right now, Baker Mayfield's the 20th best quarterback. Like it is that type of guy that they go for. An interesting one would be, I think Jared Goff's contract is up after this year.
Something like that. Yeah. Also, for the record, Matt Ryan would be pretty hard to get out of, but I am now looking at Goff.
But so, like, I think Goff would be more interesting to me potentially. I think he has shown some flashes that he can.
There's an out for Goff. So
yeah,
he
gets in that Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins-y territory at times. He doesn't have quite the arm that those guys do, but like he can produce, and so that would be interesting. Yeah, and he's QB11 right now. Fantasy isn't everything, obviously, and I think there's no question that he, like the guys that are in the top 10 aside from Carson Wentz, I think all of them are unequivocally better than Jared Goff is.
Yeah.
But speaking of which, and I think this is kind of the point to look at, and we sort of talk about it when we evaluate quarterbacks going into the season anyway.
Yeah.
But these guys can't run. So Derek Carr is currently the oldest top 12 quarterback in fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
The younger guys are more athletic, they're more dynamic. Matt Ryan, Russell Wilson, they're not really running. You know who else isn't running? Aaron Rodgers, Matthew Stafford, Ryan Tannehill, Tom Brady. They're all struggling. None of them can run, which means defenses don't have to worry about them running. And if defenses don't have to worry about them running, they can worry about them passing. And I think that's part of something you see with like Lamar Jackson in particular, where it's like defenses have to keep themselves honest about Lamar's ability to run the ball. And so he incredibly often finds an open guy.
Yeah.
I think Josh Allen, you see it too. Patrick Mahomes, you can see it, though Patrick Mahomes sometimes is blessed with less than stellar receiving talent. Which is an issue. You know, even Tua, I think Tua weirdly keeps defenses a little honest in a way that like someone like Ryan Tannehill just doesn't.
Yeah. No,
you know, I think that's why the Dolphins moved on from Ryan Tannehill to Tua.
Yeah.
So Tannehill and Rodgers have had a pair of solid games. Matt Ryan, it depends how you would define solid, but he kind of has two. I think of these guys we have discussed, the only one that I am like definitely still like, I am holding on to this guy no matter what. I'm continuing to see where it goes is Aaron Rodgers. Because I think we're still seeing the flashes of it from Aaron Rodgers, that just elite passing ability, that elite vision, and he's making do with some nothing weapons.
That is very true.
So I'm still intrigued by him. I think, unfortunately, we're starting to see the end of Tom Brady's fantasy relevance.
Perhaps, and he is definitely toward the top of the list of just veteran quarterbacks that I am giving up on. But he's behind one man. And you did mention this man's name, because I think we pretty much said all that needs to be said about Matt Ryan. Because there's some other like what do you do with Pittman and Dynasty? I mean, like if you wanted to buy.
So for me, with those Colts guys, you're probably holding them anyway. Exactly. You're not going to get an amazing return on them or any better than you would have already done. Like if you already weren't moving on from Jonathan Taylor this year when the value was at an all-time high, like why would you move on from him now when it's been dinged up a little? He's still the RB10 this year. Like these guys are talented, and we're going to talk about this, you know, when we get to my storyline that I'm looking at. But it's like sometimes when you know that a guy is talented, you got to just let the talent breathe. You just got to like try and let it win out.
Absolutely, 100%, dude. And you know, maybe the Colts will get their shit together and figure out how to make all of that stuff work eventually. But my number one guy that I am giving up on, because dear God, this is awful. Russell Wilson, him, Nathaniel Hackett, the whole Broncos experiment so far. I am not loving this.
I think the Hackett of it all is a real issue. Hackett looks clueless. That offense is not gelling. And I think you can see when it flashes, like Javonte Williams looks good. Cortland Sutton looks good. Jared Jeudy does not.
No.
Albert O, not especially.
No.
Like he's fine. He's borderline, you know, in the passable area. But like you're not that is not a guy who has earned targets.
Not at all. And I'm not sure whose fault that is necessarily either. I mean, is that a Hackett thing? Is that a Wilson thing? But like, I don't know. It's its own frustrating thing.
It is. And the issue is it going to go away? And we know Hackett's not getting fired during the season. So it's not going away that way. So then is it going to go away because Hackett figures it out or Wilson figures it out? I think at the moment we've seen nothing to indicate that they will this year.
Not only that, but the biggest concern that I have in terms of anybody in the building figuring it out is that I don't know how much Russell Wilson can do himself, because I mentioned this in our home dynasty league, you know, little group chat thing on Sleeper. I don't know why it only just now occurred to me, because there's been evidence of this for the past few years now. What made Russ cook, quote unquote, at some point back in the day was the fact that he had a great ability to roll out, just be in that kind of open part and make his reads that way. Using
Yeah,
his
he
legs
could
was
get
a
open.
huge, yeah, like
Yeah.
that was such a vital part of his effectiveness as a quarterback. And like, I don't know, I guess maybe it was just because I was blinded by just focusing too narrowly on the fantasy of it all and not focusing as much on like what's actually in front of me of it all. Because like I was watching the game and I'm like, can what reads is he making right now, like at all? And there were a lot of people, include, well, we're all guilty of this to some degree. The concept is just like, oh, Pete Carroll's holding him back, why would he let him do the thing? Well, no, he just has to get out somewhere and just do it somewhere else. He did, and he went to a place with, and again, I think it's a little, it's
Possibly a year too late.
possibly, and
Yeah.
like, and as nervous as people were, some people, I guess, about like the Pete Carroll of it all, like him and Hackett kind of cancel each other out in terms of people's brain concerns that were happening at the time, narrative wise, anyway. So he can't do it. Russell Wilson can't do it. And looking at what's going on right now, I have it pulled up in terms of the PFF grading, which I reference on this show. I reference it in my articles. If it doesn't mean anything to people, that's fine. I trust their methodology. I think it's a pretty interesting resource. Russell Wilson is the 23rd highest rated passer among quarterbacks. He is behind Marcus Mariota at 22 and just ahead of Mac Jones at 24. So just to give you a frame of reference of how bad that is, we've talked about the Patriots offense being a nightmare on this show. So that's its own thing. And then tying it quickly back into fantasy before I get more of your thoughts about that, I want to just tell people, Russell Wilson, quarterback 23. This dude behind Mitch Trubisky, who we just got finished talking about being awful, behind Ryan Tannehill, a guy that we've talked about possibly handing the keys over to a rookie behind him as well, and behind Daniel Jones. So if you're behind Daniel Jones, you're doing something wrong. I'm giving up on Russell Wilson. I don't think you have to roster him in one quarterback leagues. I'm not doing it. And the mute, the power of the mute.
There we go.
There it is. All right.
So I think for me, I'm holding for one more week, but I might not start him. It sort of depends on my league construction. Mm-hmm. He's a guy where it's like, if I have him and Marcus Mariota this week, I will play Marcus Mariota, but I might not drop Russell Wilson just yet. Because if they do manage to turn it around next week, he does get a favorable stretch of games. Yeah. Denver doesn't have like the most difficult schedule based on what I've seen. So it's like I get wanting to bench him. I think I'm ready to bench him. I think if I can keep him one more week, I'm going to keep him one more week. And if he's not good this week, I think he's droppable. I don't disagree. I think there's some other guys like Ryan Tannehill to me. I don't think you need to have him. Matthew Stafford, I'm not sure you need to have him. I really don't. The offense is kind of one note, and the one
young man's game now. Yeah. Dude, it's wild right now. And
I would rather have Jared Goff starting than any of these guys.
They get the Seahawks too. So, I mean, talk about a really good matchup coming up. If you want to go ahead and stream and tuck the vet behind, like you have yourself an opportunity to give yourself that decision-making time. If you don't want to do it right now, like that's definitely a good call for sure. I mean, is there anything that you could see from Denver? Because we have a lot to get into with your topic, so I'm going to give you as much time as that for that as possible. But just anything else to add on that at all?
Yeah, it's the only other thing is like they have the talent to do it. Like New England is frustrating, but New England doesn't have the talent to do it. So it's okay.
Yeah.
That it's frustrating because I'm not betting on him anyway. Like Sutton is good. Sutton's still performing. Judy should be a good wide receiver. He's not showing it. Though he's not necessarily getting quite the looks we would hope for him. Javonte Williams looking good, but Melvin Gordon's taking some of his touches. Admittedly, like Melvin Gordon also like not looking bad. He just doesn't look quite as good as Javonte Williams. There's just so much talent on this team that's like you kind of want to let it get one more chance. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just waiting one more week, seeing what happens. But yeah, if nothing does, it might be time to cut bait on Russell Wilson there.
And sometimes, you gotta know
You
when to hold them.
You gotta know when to drop players. That is my storyline going into week 4 because we officially have 3 weeks of the season. When I do my heat check, like to look at 3 weeks of games. So right now, there are guys like from the quarterback position, Carson Wentz and Jared Goff, who aren't like considered the most elite, though Carson Wentz is now actually rostered in like almost 70% of leagues, which is pretty crazy. Jared Goff, though, is not. He's only rostered in 45% of Yahoo leagues, 31% of ESPN leagues. So spoiler alert, he will almost certainly make the heat check article this week. But yeah, you gotta like opportunity is everything. You should take a Moneyball approach to fantasy football. The goal is to score points. You score points by having the ball in your hands. Mm-hmm. So that means targets, that means attempts, that like means passes. Those are the things that matter. So like for me, something like Tyler Conklin, who we talked about, like he is a tight end, or Kyle Pitts even. He's a tight end getting targets. If he is getting targets, that means he's getting opportunities. If he's getting opportunities, that means he's getting chances to convert those opportunities into points. I do not care about someone like, say, Devin Duvernay, who we're going to get into a little bit later down the line, where he's not getting any targets. And like, yeah, there's some like explosiveness that he can provide, but if the ball's not getting in his hands, like that is a giant issue. So, Carson Wentz, someone that's currently in the top 5 quarterback, it's passing attempts for him. Like he is getting to throw the ball a fair amount, over 40 attempts per game. It's not nothing. Now, of course, he wasn't good against Philly, so they didn't turn into much. But, if you got a guy throwing the ball like 40 times a game, that's something to consider. Like you actually do have to take that seriously, whether you ultimately end up betting on the guy or not. So then you have to distinguish between flukes and trends. So Carson Wentz, another good example here. It's like, is it fluky that he is doing this well, or is it a trend? And so I think the trend you can see is this offense does want to put the ball in his hands like 40 plus times a game to try and do something with it. That is not a fluke. That is at this point a trend. What's fluky is the first 2 weeks he scored 7 touchdowns, and last week he scored 0. I think the 7 is the fluke, not the 0. So I'm probably not going to pick him up. Like I'm just not. But other people might go, well, the 0 is a one-off and the 7 is the other thing. Like Philly's a tough team, and like there's merit to that. The trick is knowing which way to go on it. And sometimes you're just going to have to go with your gut. You're just going to have to bet on it. But like another example is Chris Olave. Chris Olave was the Saints wide receiver 3 in week 1. Mm-hmm. So people probably let him go after that point.
There are some people who did, and it's very unfortunate.
And since then, he's seen 13 targets a game. So if you dropped him after that first bad week, you blew it because then you had to hope that you could pick him back up. And if you didn't, you're never seeing him again because he's staying on rosters at this point. So a guy kind of like that to me, these are guys you should keep that I see like as available. And might be on your rosters. So like Treylon Burks is actually surprisingly available to pick up. I would pick him up.
Yeah.
But if you have him on your roster, I would keep him. He's a guy who we've seen explosive playmaking ability with. He has actually gotten some decent targets. He had one bad game, but I think the other one, he's getting around like 6 targets a game.
Especially this last week, dude. He's really growing into being the wide receiver 1 there.
He will be the wide receiver 1 by the season end. So the key is just like being able to hold on to him if you can, because that is an explosive talent that you just can't find everywhere. There are plenty of guys on your waiver wire where it's like they just are never going to be able to do what the peak of Treylon Burks can do. And so you got to hold on to guys like that. I think Aaron Rodgers, as we discussed, is another guy that you should keep. He's less likely to be available on your waivers because more people are comfortable keeping him given his proven track record. And if you look, he's only available in like 7 to 6% of leagues. But we talked about it. He's QB 26 right now. Like, you're talking about holding on to a guy that not only is not a starter, but if you were playing 2 QB, he'd be on your bench. If you were just going off of the points he's been scoring.
Yeah.
Now, again, we don't necessarily do that. We project, et cetera, and most likely you've been playing Rodgers, and I think that is the right thing to do. But, this is a numbers game, and sometimes when we look at the numbers, the data tells us one thing. We kind of have to parse it and go through and see, like, what stands out. So then there are guys you should stash.
Yes.
And there's kind of 2 levels to this. So there's the guys you should stash long-term. So like Brian Robinson Jr., Gus Edwards, Jameson Williams, any of the handcuff running backs. These are guys that should be on every roster because of the guaranteed opportunity that they will get. Now, it's tough to put all these guys on every roster because of size limits in your league sometimes. Like, I'm sure there were a lot of people that didn't have Khalil Herbert on their roster because they just couldn't find space, but maybe there was a chance you could have found space. And so someone like that where they're getting the clear opportunity if the league guy goes down. Again, Brian Robinson Jr., Gus Edwards, we expect those guys to get clear opportunities when they're back healthy. Same with Jameson Williams. These are guys you have to have because when it comes to the guys that cut, like Devin Duvernay's on teams, MVS, Rex Burkhead, these are guys you can get rid of because they're just not going to produce at a certain level. Devin Duvernay, he's making the most of what he's getting, but he's getting like no targets. He's getting like 2 targets a game lately. MVS is getting 7 targets. He's a little confusing, but he's getting no air yards. And that's what makes him special to a degree. So if he's not getting that, those targets are not worth as much. And then Rex Burkhead is another example of like all volume is not good volume because Rex Burkhead got a ton of volume week 1, did not produce enough with the volume he got. And since then, Dameon Pierce has taken over. And even if Dameon Pierce goes down, I just don't want the production that Rex Burkhead is going to do with that role. For me, I'd much rather have someone like Rashad White, Alexander Madison, Jamal Williams. Again, Jamal Williams is likely rostered in a lot of your leagues at this point. Khalil Herbert. Again, these are guys where if they get the opportunity, I will expect them to succeed. And then there's another level of stash where it's guys to take a chance on because they've been getting opportunity and you're not sure if it's a fluke. You're not sure if it's a trend, but like, heck, if you can just take a go at them, great. And if it doesn't pay off,
like
someone like Greg Dortch.
Yeah, there no Greg Dortch. Let's go. All right.
And then Matt Collins is another one where it's like these guys are getting a ton of targets. And like Greg Dortch, put it this way, if Rondale Moore comes back, you will probably have to cut Greg Dortch. But until then, roll with it. Like, go with it. And like Matt Collins, like Hunter Renfrow might take his role back over, as the second wide receiver in this offense. And if he does, oh well, you have to let go of Matt Collins. But for now, they're getting a ton of volume. It seems sustainable. You should at least pick him up. If you let him on your bench for a week, that's okay. I think, Dortch is more playable. Hollins is more benchable just because of their different situations. Because Dortch, we think, just will have a role until Rondale Moore comes back. Maybe DeAndre Hopkins throws a wrench into it, but Dortch just has such a lot on that slot role that Hopkins shouldn't affect it too much. And then Matt Collins, again, you're kind of gauging him against Hunter Renfrow, even if he is currently beating out Devontae Adams, which is a little absurd. So just, cut those guys if they're fluky. It's okay. And then there's, the guys who are tough to gauge, like Curtis Samuel after week 1 was tough to gauge. There's no way to really tell if week 1 was a fluke or a trend. And I think someone that's similar to that is Romeo Doubs this week. He really stepped up this past week for Green Bay, looked like a potential wide receiver 1. We thought well of him going into drafts, but we know Aaron Rodgers doesn't necessarily trust those guys. So, I would definitely be picking him up. I'm sure a lot of people did. But he's another one where it's tough to gauge. But I think worst case, again, he falls into that guys to take a chance on role where it's like, if you have to cut him after 1 week, it's okay. I think Curtis Samuel was the same way. And it's why I have a lot of Curtis Samuel. And that's, that's the payoff for when you take these chances.
Absolutely. And I think, yes.
No, that's it. Proceed.
Yeah. Because, and I think that allowing you to go through and explain a lot of this process not only helps people comprehend the heat check, which again you can find on the website fantasy6pack.net. Like, it's a fabulous resource if you can put yourself in the mindset of taking a lot of the things that you said, to heart. And like, I'd like to think we do a pretty good job of doing all of that. And one of the original goals of the Lateral Show in general was to kind of like we're not going to be able to tell you exactly what to do, because like what good is every single fantasy football show just being like, okay, here's what happened, so go do this. That's not really helping people make their decisions a little bit better. Like, retraining how your brain processes this information and what exactly to look at is the cornerstone of all of this. And being able to talk about that on this show is, I think, super important, also because, kind of like I was saying about how there's the traditional format of a lot of shows that kind of do the same thing. There's a lot of non-committal at this time of year to, well, through 3 games, I mean, it's, I don't know, but we kind of like him, so what do we do? And then it's so many wishy-washy answers. And to go through and look at things, like you said, usage, the number one pillar that you opened up with. If the usage is there, that's a great place to start. And then going through and being like, okay, well, is this due to a certain factor because somebody isn't in the lineup? Or is this just due to what? Reading situations and being able to evaluate what's happening on the field is super important. It just is. Because, like, for as much as this is a numbers game, being able to blend the numbers with the reality of what's happening in the sport, blah, 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 we come out with some pretty interesting decisions. So, like, I don't know, dude, A+, 100%, big fan of the whole thing. And then just some players that I'm going to sprinkle in, because I think going off of your logic of just looking through, we've seen the usage, we've seen the information, a guy that I think you can move off of. We talked about him a little bit, Jerry Jeudy. I don't think people need to stick around with that anymore. I wrote about that on Fantasy Pros website over the summer. I was tasked with evaluating the Denver wide receiver situation, and based off of Hackett's, offensive scheme and what skill set Jerry Jeudy brings to the table, he was an odd fit anyway. And the quote unquote blessing, at least in his case, of Tim Patrick going down opened up an opportunity he's done nothing with. So it's a weird fit schematically. Who cares? You can move on. A player that, and Greg Dortch, I'm using this as a platform for Greg Dortch, because I promised in the Stashes article that I wouldn't write about Greg Dortch anymore. I didn't say anything about talking about Greg Dortch on the podcast. So let me tell you, folks, I on my soapbox. Okay, here we go. Mid-show on my soapbox. Who is to say that Rondale Moore comes back and really stops this from happening? Because let's be honest, they tried doing some similar-ish stuff with Rondale Moore last year, and it didn't really work out that well. Are we willing to entertain the possibility that, not because Rondale Moore is bad per se, but just because Greg Dortch is good enough, maybe he just keeps this? That's another dimension.
Here's the thing. Cliff Kingsbury is the head coach.
I know.
And I don't think he thinks that way. So for me, like, I actually was not big on Rondale Moore. I've been pretty much out on Rondale Moore from the get-go. Everyone was like, oh, he's so talented. I'm like, I don't care. Like, he's flashy at times. Like, he's got some athleticism. I don't think he's a great receiver. And he hasn't been a great receiver in the NFL so far. But I think given the draft capital that they spent on him and Cliff Kingsbury being who he is, I think they will want to try and recoup that investment, and they are going to give him the ball back.
That's entirely possible. It is. I got to stick up for my man.
No, I totally get it. With Jerry Judy's really bad right now. Like, I talked about how KJ Osborne, like, whoops, for telling you to go ahead and pick him up. KJ Osborne's outproducing Jerry Jeudy right now. KJ Osborne in PPR is wide receiver 55. Jerry Judy's wide receiver 57. I would still probably hold for another week, but you should not play him. Jerry Jeudy should not be in your starting lineup this week, period.
No.
Now,
there's no reason.
Whether you drop him or not, who's to say? Like, sometimes you have really shallow benches. Like, I'm in a standard league. It's a 5-person bench. I would absolutely be dropping Jerry Jeudy.
Yeah.
Like
At that
without
point,
any hesitation.
he does nothing for you in that situation at all.
Does not at all. So, but like there's one league I'm in where it's like an 8-person bench. And at that point, it's like, I'm going to hang on to Jerry Jeudy, see what happens. I'm sort of doing a similar thing actually with Rashad Bateman. Like Rashad Bateman is a guy that's like, I'm holding on to him for a week, but like I'm not starting him in any leagues this week. I like Rashad Bateman. He's actually even producing to a degree. He's wide receiver 30 right now. But like the targets are a little concerning. 5 targets in week 1, 4 targets in week 3. You have games like week 2 where he gets 7 targets. 7 targets is good. Even though like he got the touchdown, which helps a lot. Like he still already had 10.8 points. I'm sorry. I'm looking at standard scoring there. There we go. Uh-huh. So you take away the touchdown, he actually had 14.8 points.
You love it.
Which, again, pretty good. For me, honestly, if I can get 10 points out of a guy without accounting for touchdowns, if that's something that's happening regularly, that is the kind of guy I want to roster. Because I don't care about the touchdowns. I only care about the touchdowns if it is from red zone usage. So if you're someone that's regularly getting opportunities inside the 20, inside the 10, inside the 5, I will start caring about your touchdowns. I think a guy like that was James Conner. On the running back side. I think another guy like that is Adam Thielen, at least in years past, where he just got looks in the red zone. And everyone's like, oh, this can't be sustainable. It's like, well, I get where you're coming from. And maybe it can't be sustainable. But if this guy is getting like more opportunities in the red zone than a bunch of other people, he's going to be more sustainable than those people. So I think those are the things to like really keep an eye on. For me, it is always targets, red zone targets, or running backs touches, red zone touches, combination of those factors. For quarterbacks, I want to see rushing attempts. Like I honestly don't even care about passing attempts unless
it's like an ungodly
producing
number,
less than 200 yards a game. That's kind of my Mendoza line on quarterbacks. If you're producing over 200 yards a game and you can run the ball, then sign me up. And that's why I have Marcus Mariota as the starting quarterback in our league of record this week, going up against you and Jalen Hurts.
Absolutely, dude, 100%. And I guess to put a little bit more of a cap on the overall lesson, kind of like I was saying before, the whole vibe of just make sure you do the, make sure you're evaluating the usage, doing all that stuff. Some underlying lessons I want to highlight so they don't get buried. Don't give up on rookie wide receivers and redraft, folks. This
is true.
Remember that, because
don't give up on rookie anythings in redraft. Quarterbacks, I think, are the ones you can give up on the quickest.
Yes.
Tight ends you probably shouldn't have drafted in the first place.
Probably not.
But with wide receivers and running backs, like they need time to mature into the offense. Yeah. And, I think we're seeing Breece Hall as an example on the running back side, like getting more and more integrated into that offense, and he's going to really start producing.
Yeah. So you just have to remember at all times to be aggressive, be aggressive. Be aggressive. Be aggressive.
Honestly, you do sometimes. You really do. But the way I honestly think of it, whenever I'm evaluating a player, there's this thing Craig Ferguson says in one of his comedy specials. It's how he thinks about whether or not he needs to say something. And he's got 3 things. Does it need to be said? Does it need to be said by me? And does it need to be said by me right now? So for evaluating players, it's like, are they talented? Are they talented in getting opportunities? Are they talented in getting good opportunities? You want to hit that third one. And if you can't hit that third one, you want to hit that second one. But then if all else fails, go for the first one. You will notice, though, that none of those was just, are they getting opportunities? It's, are they talented? Are they talented and getting opportunities? Are they talented and are they getting good opportunities? If you use that to evaluate pretty much any player, I think you will be more successful than not.
Well, there you go. And I guess that essentially kind of rules out the Lavisco Chanel type. So sorry to, burst that bubble. But if you want some unique opportunities to save money in depositing money on a DFS platform, you can
I was
go to
about to be like,
Thrive.
did we get sponsored by Geico? Are we telling people to save money on car insurance?
No, but you can use promo code HERMS on Thrive Fantasy when you sign up for the first time. New users get a 100% match on their first deposit up to $100 on Thrive Fantasy. I don't know that we have the time in the show to go over picks necessarily, but I have a column that comes out. I go through some. If you want to check that out on the website, that's a thing that you can do. But just once again, promo code HERMS, Thrive Fantasy. Thumbs up.
I would say that's definitely always a good thing to check out. Especially like as one is vamping, trying to search potentially for something to take the over or under on.
Yeah.
Checking out Thrive Fantasy, checking out that article, both I think very good options, including I like Ezekiel Elliott over 9.5 receiving yards.
Hey,
I really do. He's basically got to catch like one ball, in my opinion, against this Washington defense that is frankly not that good. It's a home game. I get that the opportunities have been like a little low for him, but really, like all he's got to do is get 10 yards. I think Ezekiel Elliott can get 10 receiving yards. So that is my Thrive Fantasy prop pick this week.
Use promo code HERMS. There we go. So we got that out of the way. Boom. Fun plug. And then we got the boom bust. We gonna go over it the same way generally. I'm actually prepared with mine this time. So
that's fantastic because a peek behind the curtain, we adopted a new show sheet process this week.
Yes, we did.
And on this show sheet, boom bust was not listed. And so it's one of the things I didn't prep for.
Yes, we did forget to mention that. So I'll go ahead and
why don't you go ahead and I'll see what I can do.
I'll start with mine because you did kind of bring it up a little bit earlier when talking about, you just don't give up on rookies in fantasy, the whole thing. Like eventually things will figure to work out in their favor if they're good enough. And I noticed on the Fantasy Pros PPR projections that they still have Michael Carter projected for more than Breece Hall. Now it's by 0.6 points, but the Michael Carter at 11.6, like I just have a hard time really seeing that because, like, to be honest, it's pretty clear the opportunity has been dwindling. So just, looking at the game log for Michael Carter so far this year, 19 total touch opportunities. Now I'm adding rushing attempts and targets when I'm talking about this, just to be clear. So 19 opportunities in week 1. We get down to 12 last in week 2 against Cleveland, and then in the game against Cincinnati it's only 13. But I would like to emphasize the targets have gone from 9 to 5 to 2. It's pretty clear what's happening, and in the opposite direction, Breece Hall only going up and up and up. Although he started week 1 right out of the gate with 9 targets, only had the one for the one catch in week 2, but 11 targets, dude. 11 targets against Cincinnati. Like, it's pretty clear the whole Breece Hall thing definitely going to happen. And I get that, like, it's a decent matchup against Pittsburgh. I hate to say it, but, like, my boys ain't doing so hot. So I'm not really looking to be in on the Michael Carter thing because I'm using this opportunity of the podcast to plant my flag on this is the Breece Hall breakout week. So there you go. My bust. And I guess to some degree a boom would be Breece Hall. But since I don't really want to morph two things into one take because that feels a little lazy, I will add something else to the mix here. Noah Brown. 7.3 projected points in that Washington matchup you were just talking about. Now, I know you talked about it in your Heat Check article not that long ago. I also talked about Noah Brown in my waiver wire article. And to some degree, the opportunity that is available to him is not only due to Michael Gallup not being part of the equation, but also Dalton Schultz dealing with his own injury. But if he's getting opportunity and he's doing something with it, then you can't really overlook that. And as far as I'm aware, it's not a full guarantee that both Michael Gallup and Dalton Schultz are going to be out there. So it also kind of ties into your topic from earlier. You know, the interesting part of it is the opportunity potentially for Noah Brown has seen an extended window now that there are two big target competitors that are not necessarily standing in his way, quote unquote. So I would definitely take the over for that on Noah Brown. And if he's not already on your fantasy bench and you didn't pick him up off the waiver wire, I would definitely look his way. The two of us have written about it on the Fantasy Six Pack website. We have a lot of faith in him. So it hurts me as a Jalen Tolbert person from the summer, but facts be facts. So there you go. Combination of the Jets running back thing, and then also just go ahead, get that boom opportunity from Noah Brown of the Dallas Cowboys at receiver. Was that good enough?
I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
And I talked about Noah Brown in the heat check last week.
There you go.
And so I think that is definitely a good choice. Another guy I talked about who I might have, again, been like slightly a little too conservative on, who we've talked about in this episode, is Greg Dortch, who is my pick for boom this week. He gets the Carolina defense. He has been regularly producing in PPR leagues. He's scored at least 13 points per game. It's a good matchup. Rondale Moore's not going to be here. DeAndre Hopkins is not going to be here. James Conner might not. That's like, he's been, I think, dealing with an injury. I expect him to play for what it's worth. But I know that's been a question mark recently. So, yeah, give me Greg Dortch for sure as a boom. He's currently wide receiver 44. I fully expect him to be in that top 36. I got to be honest. Couldn't find a great bust candidate. So I'm going with a guy that I just don't really believe in that much. And that's TJ Hawkinson, who's currently projected to be tight end 8. Great matchup against Seattle, to be fair. But you know what? It's a great matchup for everyone against Seattle. And I get that DeAndre Swift may not play, which increases the likelihood that Hawkinson gets some of those targets. So I will couch this with, if Amon-Ra and Swift don't play, Hawkinson probably won't bust. But if only Swift doesn't play, then I still feel confident that the wide receivers will just tear apart the Seattle offense whenever Jamal Williams, who actually should have a really good opportunity this week, isn't doing so on the ground. So Hawkinson, currently my pick for a bust. I also don't love David Njoku, and David Njoku is naturally a little boom bust just because of how he gets used in that offense. It's a great opportunity against Atlanta, especially since Atlanta is definitely better against the wide receivers than they are against the tight ends. But I think I'm going to stick with Hawkinson.
I feel that, man. I feel that 100%. And, we did talk a little bit about TJ Hawkinson when discussing some of the tight ends in either last episode or the one before. So, hey, a bit of a callback. There you go. That is one of the cool things about the Lateral Show. Everything ties in together, and continuity is a really big part of it. So if you ever miss some episodes, there's always some interesting things to go back and listen to. So
I actually will say, admittedly, the low-hanging fruit for a bust, Russell Wilson still projected to be a QB 10 this week against the Raiders. Nothing really to suggest that will be the case.
Yeah, I guess if it becomes it would have to be a shootout for that to really. He's risky, and we already talked about him. But, so we talked plenty. So something to consider. That was a fun-packed episode of the Lateral Show, a sideways look at fantasy football for this week ahead of week 4. So, to close out the show, we are going to do something a little bit different that I am just springing on you last minute because, keeping it on the toes. We are going to sign off by telling people where they can find us and what we do, while also sharing that in our home league of record, it is the Lateral Showdown.
It is. That's right. Okay.
So we're going to go over our teams as we, exit the program. So I'll say where you can find me. I'll talk about my team. Say,
why don't you start with talking about where people can find you? I'm making one change real quick that I totally forgot to do before I discussed it with you offset, as it were. Yes. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and then I'll let you know when to refresh.
All right, okay. So I'll take that off the screen for now. But you can find me on Twitter at Herms NFL. You can find my written work at fantasy6pack.net. And if you want to see the full, entire behind the paywall version of my waiver wire article, which I would like to believe to date has gotten a lot of really good people on really quality fantasy benches if you read, but you have to go behind the paywall at fantasy6pack.net with an all access plan that gets you the DFS tools, access to the Discord community, and our award-winning rankings, including mine from week 3, because I finished inside the top 10 at Fantasy Pro. My rankings aren't a part of Fantasy Six Pack, unfortunately, but
last to me this week in our matchup, which has the lineup that I just refreshed in there. So why don't you go ahead and give that old girl a whirl, as it were.
Yes. Oh, because I zoomed in so far and now I have to get it back in frame. So, all right, tell people where they can find you.
Oh, where they can find me? Well, it's your boy McLateral, aka McLateral FF on the Twitter. You can find me on Twitter at McLateral FF. You can also find me on Twitter at MacMcMillanATL, which is where I drop all my stuff from Tom's Guide, which is my day job. Been talking a lot about iPhones lately, but Amazon just had an event. There's stuff coming out from Microsoft. There's a game I'm reviewing that I'll be very excited to announce later in October.
Ooh, fun.
So keep an eye out for that. Some good stuff coming your way there. And of course, you can get the heat check at Fantasy Six Pack every Saturday, and there will surely be one coming this week. Other than that, saw Fantane's DC last night, which was a good show. So I'm feeling good going into this weekend where, again, I get you in our home league. So let's show the good people what the matchup is.
Absolutely. And for the audio listeners, this will be the end of the show because this is kind of a visual medium thing. So you'll hear us next week. Goodbye. But for you video people, we're staying on. We are staying on. It's a big one for us. So, I mean, obviously, the origin of this show, our former
I suppose
website,
we could have read out the lineups, and then the audio people still would have gotten a taste.
I know, but here's the thing. The podcast is now officially under an hour, whereas the video can extend a little bit. So, I'm thinking.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see it.
Yeah. So, I mean, the whole thing of the lateral, it stems from this league. So it's very important to the both of us. And then also, I think we're both, no, I'm 1-2. You are 2-1. Yeah. So,
I am oddly enough the odd man out for the playoffs at the moment because of points scored.
Yeah. And in terms of that, I think we're actually pretty, I've had some devastating losses. It's been very frustrating.
Well, but was my quarterback. So that was my issue.
100%. So, it's a big week for the two of us. We've had our share of difficulties. So I am rolling out this lineup unless something changes, but this is what I've committed to so far. So I've got Jalen Hurts as my quarterback. I also have his teammate, Devontae Smith. I feel really good about just having an Eagle stack as a fixture of this lineup. Also got Kyle Pitts as my tight end. That's pretty cool. Michael Pittman Jr. is my other wide receiver. I'm a little bit nervous just about the whole Matt Ryan thing that we discussed in this show. And then I still got the Eagles defense. Cade York, shout out, rookie kicker of the Browns in my lineup for that. But my biggest weak spot that I am nervous about, and I feel like, because it's in the comments of the video, just like, let us know who you think's going to win. Because, I mean, I'm really curious what the public thinks, you six Packers out there. Alvin Kamara, Devin Singletary, man, it makes me sad. It makes me sad because my other option is like Dameon Pierce, but do I really want to go back to that immediately? That's what I got, though. So that's my team.
Well, so I've got a bit of a weak spot at quarterback, but I am sticking with Marcus Mariota, who gives you a nice rushing floor. Plus, Cleveland, without Myles Garrett, maybe not like the toughest matchup in the world. Especially also a home game in Atlanta, so that helps. Austin Eckler against the Texans, Breece Hall against the Steelers, Justin Jefferson, Deontay Johnson as my wide receivers against New Orleans and the Jets, respectively. Everett, Gerald, but he's got the Texans. That's pretty good. I'm liking that matchup for a tight end. And then Marquise Brown as my flex. And I have to say, I know that Curtis Samuel has been producing. I feel pretty good about having Marquise Brown as my flex going up against Samuel.
Oh, did I not say Curtis Samuel? Yeah, okay.
I think you might have missed it, but it's okay.
We got that.
Then I got the Browns defense against Atlanta. So either Mariota will suck and I get the defense points, or Mariota will be awesome and it's okay if I miss out on the defense points.
Level out, you know. Yeah, I like it.
And then I got Jake Elliott as my kicker. He's a guy who's really touting into this season. He's largely provided, and he gets the Jags this week. So feeling good about that. I think if I was to change anything, it would be maybe steering away from the skid on that Browns defense. But I honestly don't hate the balancing act there. I may roll with it.
Well, there you go. Viewers, I mean, come on, let us know. I mean, we're going to put this into a form of a tweet that you'll be able to find on our page at the Lateral FF on Twitter, and I'm sure we'll both retweet it and do the whole thing. I don't know if I'll make a poll. I don't know if we need to go that far, but just something to advertise. It's the big week for the Lateral Show, and I'm sure we'll talk about it on the next episode.
So. Yeah, it'll be curious. When do we get each other in the Dynasty League?
I don't know, although I am 100% committed to losing in that league.
That's true. The tank is real. You had the most possible points of any team in the league this past week, and you picked about half of them.
You're goddamn right I did, because that's Herms and that's the Lateral Show!
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Lateral Show. Fasten your seatbelts, because here we go.